For more such videos, subscribe to Shoot Guru's YouTube channel and press the bell icon for regular notifications. Hello once again and welcome to a new edition of Photography 101. And today we're going to talk about aperture. What is aperture? Aperture is the opening in the lens that allows light to come in and hit the shutter, and of course as the shutter goes up then hit the sensor. So we're going to talk about aperture and what it does in the process of taking the photograph. Now if you look at your lens, you will see some interesting numbers on it. Something like 1:1.8 or 1:3.4-5.6. Now these numbers are not anything else but a description of what the aperture of that lens is. Now, two different lenses may look exactly the same, but may be different in terms of the aperture or the opening, the circular opening inside that lets light come in. The number that's mentioned on your lens, which could be, let's say, 1:1.8. So the 1.8 part is the description of the largest the aperture can open up to. So 1.8 is the largest. In some lenses it may say 1:4.0, which means that the lens will at maximum open to an aperture of 4.0. Now what is this 4.0 and what is the 1.8? And let me give you a comparative example. The relationship between the size of the opening and the number is actually an inverse relationship. So the bigger the number, the smaller the opening, and the smaller the number, the larger the opening. And as it is very obvious, if the opening is large, a lot more light will come in and hit the sensor as compared to a very small opening. So an aperture of, let's say, f16 or f32 are really small openings, very, very small sized dot-like openings where the light comes in. But an aperture of 1.4 or 1.8 or let's say 2.8, 5.6 are relatively large when it comes to sizes of openings of the aperture. Now, besides controlling the amount of light that comes in and hits the shutter and then the sensor, it also controls one more thing, and which is what today's topic is about: depth of field. What is depth of field? Now you may have seen in certain portraits that the face and the person sitting are absolutely sharp and clear, but the background is blurred and diffused, right? How do you do that? It looks pretty cool. Or in macro photography, when you're actually shooting from really up close and you're shooting very, very small objects, the object itself may be in focus, but everything around it, maybe before, maybe after, in the foreground or background, will be out of focus. That is what depth of field is. That at the point of focus, a certain distance in front and a certain distance behind it will look like it is in clear focus, but everything else is out of focus. So that field or that range of focus is called the depth of field. And it can be easily attributed to the size of the opening. So if the aperture is wide, if it's very big, like a 1.4 or 1.8 or 2, 2.4, 5.6, which are very large openings as compared to the lens itself, the chances of getting blur are far higher. Let me give you an example. Now if you were to shoot, let's say using a 50 mm lens, and if you're doing a portrait, and you're shooting from pretty close to the person, then I can assure you if you focus on the nose, the ear will be out of focus. So the range or the depth which will remain in focus is actually very, very small. Whereas if you were to take a similar shot with an aperture of f16 or maybe f32, what will happen? That a longer area or larger area will be in focus. Now, depth of field is also a factor of how far you are from your subject. If I were to use an f4 which is a fairly large, but I am very far away from your main subject, in that case, the depth of field will still be very large. Or if I were using an f16 and right close to the subject, in that case, I will still get a fairly shallow depth of field. So two things control depth of field. One is the size of the aperture, and one is the distance of shooting from the subject to the camera. So those are the things you need to take care. So two things you must remember: aperture controls amount of light comes in because of the size of the opening, and it also controls the depth of field. And if you want more blur, go bigger in terms of the opening size, which means that the number has to be small. So smaller the number, bigger the opening, and bigger the number, smaller the opening, and smaller the opening, less the depth of field. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.